Good morning and welcome to JCPS, Jefferson County Public Schools. This is indeed a monumental day in the life of Jefferson County Public Schools. And why do I say that? About 9-10 months ago, our board decided that we needed a curriculum management audit. We needed to pay for a curriculum management audit and see what our deficiencies were. Part of that process is this organizational review, which is a very significant part of that process. And you'll see why when you see the PowerPoint that explains what these two gentlemen to my right have said in their report and what they will tell you today. And it's just when you hear their words and see what they have to tell us, you'll decide yourselves, I think, that this is a monumental day in the life of Jefferson County Public Schools. I truly believe that JCPS is on the precipice of success, and we are on the right road towards achieving that success because of this board and Dr. Hargens contracting with a national firm to perform the curriculum management audit that we will receive in about 30 days or so. And again, part of that is this organizational review. Neither that audit, that report will receive, nor this report will be put away. This will be in our minds, on the board's mind and on Dr. Hargens' mind, throughout each and every day of this coming year and thereafter. It's not going to be put away. I'd like to point out that we have not hired these folks to slap us on the back and tell us all the good things that we've done. JCPS has done a lot of great things. We continue to do a lot of great things. But somewhere along the line, our organizational chart, the things that people are supposed to do, the desks that people are supposed to sit at and perform for our students and the community, will show that I think we're going to see there's some deficiencies. And that's good news. What you're going to hear is a lot of things that need to be improved. That is good news for Jefferson County Public Schools, and you'll see why just in a little while. So I'll now turn this over to Dr. Hargens, who will introduce these two gentlemen to my right. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Imhoff. As Chair Imhoff said, we called for this comprehensive review. And after a few short months of a review of our organization, we now have a detailed assessment of improvements we can make to our organizational structure. It is my pleasure to introduce the reviewers. Dr. Fenwick English is an educational leader, author, professor, editor, auditor, and advocate of improved school leadership. He has served as a university professor, dean, department chair, superintendent of schools, assistant superintendent of schools, and middle school principal. Over the last 2 decades, he has held many prominent positions in the American educational administration field. He is the author or co-author of over 20 books and over 100 journal articles. In 2022, he became the Robert Wendell Eves Senior Chair at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. English worked several years in the private sector as a director partner at Peat Marwick and Mitchell, now KPMG Peat Marwick. Dr. English has worked on organizational studies of the Orange County, Florida school system, the Columbus, Ohio public schools, and the high school division of the New York City public schools, as well as working with over 25 school systems for evaluations of organizational structure. Dr. William Poston, to my right, is an emeritus professor of educational leadership and policy studies at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, where he served for 17 years. His experience includes 15 years as a superintendent in Tucson and Phoenix, Arizona, and in Billings, Montana. He served in the United States Marine Corps and has many distinctive professional achievements, being nationally known for his work in curriculum-centered budgeting. He is the co-author of over a dozen books, including School Budgets in Hard Times, Confronting Cutbacks and Critics. Dr. Poston has led curriculum management audits in over 70 school systems around the United States and internationally. He was also the executive director of the Iowa Superintendent's Academy and the Iowa School Business Management Academy. Dr. Poston has worked on organizational studies of of school districts in California, Iowa, Montana, and Arizona, and has worked with over 70 school systems in the United States and abroad in conducting organizational structure evaluations. We are pleased to have them here today to share their findings and recommendations, as we ask them to, regarding how to improve our organizational structure for the benefit of our students. Dr. English and Dr. Poston.
Thank you, Dr. Hargan. It's our pleasure to give the report today. Just to draw your attention to the fact that you should have two handouts. One is an executive summary of this much larger report, which is 70-plus pages. We're not going to be able to have time to go through all 70 pages, obviously, but our purpose is to give you an overview, a broad overview of what's in the much larger report. You do have copies of the much larger report, and the executive summary is keyed to the pages in the report. So if there's a specific place you want to read about, you don't care about some, but you want to read about others, then you can go straight into the report and see the data there. We see the report as the start of a conversation that the superintendent will have with the board and the broader community, meaning the lay and professional communities in Jefferson County, about the future of the central office staffing, this study was really about functions, staffing, and Dr. Poston will show you some of the questions that we dealt with. The bottom line is in Appendix D. People want to know, well, what is that bottom line? Is that we are recommending the elimination of 36 positions and the reestablishment of 31 positions in a different kind of way. So that would start our discussion. Let me introduce Dr. Bill Poston, who will now give you the overview of the organizational study. Bill?
Thank you, Finn. What I'm going to do is provide an overview with some slides of what the report contains. The purpose of the study, as you know, as was already stated, was to analyze the administrative organizational structure of the central office of the Jefferson County Public Schools, and then to clarify and apprise the issues regarding the organization in terms of effectiveness without evaluating specific people. There were some assumptions that we dealt with. It's a good reason. There are good reasons that you, from time to time, do an organizational study. Large organizations have a tendency to drift from their central mission over time as positions are added and functions are changed. And so it's a good idea from time to time to periodically examine the organization to make sure that maximum effectiveness and efficiency is being provided. The Executive Cabinet restructuring, which was established by the Board of Education on October 31st of this year, provided the basis for the organizational study. The organizational structure that you see here involved a change in the superintendent's executive cabinet from more than a dozen positions to 5 positions in that cabinet: a chief operations officer, a chief academic officer, a chief financial officer, a chief community relations officer, and then a data management and program evaluation officer. Those 5 positions provided the basis for our particular study. Our data source involved normative data from a survey, an online survey, 265 participants, all members of the central administrative staff, participated, and there were 232 usable responses. I often get the question, why would some responses not be useful or usable? And the reason is that we were unable to identify the respondent as a member of the central administration team. We had insufficient data to do that. The other reason would have been that the survey had not been completed properly. We also interviewed 55 individuals within the central administrative structure, but also school board members and community leaders, in order to get a picture of perceptions about the school district in the greater Louisville community. The instruments used are in the report, the questions that were asked. The questionnaire, which is 75 questions for the online survey, is included. The individual responses are deemed confidential and are not included. We looked first at an ancillary issue, which was the central administrative staff size. And we looked at the percentage of employees that were administrators in the system. These are non-school-based administrators. And we found that it was 2.48% of the 14,144 employees. We also found that the teaching personnel amounted to 43.44%. When we compare that to this peer group of 20 school districts nationally, and it involves 10 school districts that are larger than Jefferson County and 10 school districts that are smaller than Jefferson County, and they're all members of the great city schools in the United States, we found that the average for this group was 50% of the employees are usually in teaching, in classrooms, and 3.79% are in administration. So Jefferson County, percentage-wise, compared to this peer group of national school districts, is below the average of percentage of administrators from that group. However, it's also below the percentage of that group in terms of employees, the percentage of employees that are in the classroom. Both of those may engender some points of discussion. We also asked a couple of things about the central administrative structure. We asked whether it was about right, the current costs, whether they were about right. And there was sort of an even split. 44% agreed, yes, that they were about right. 39% disagreed and thought that they were not about right. So then we asked, well, what about the number of central office administrators? Is that about right? And there we got a quite different response. 65% said no, it's not about right. And 22% said that it is. So the perception is that there are too many or more people than might be perceived as necessary. If we look at the instructional expenditures of these same peer districts and the percentage of the expenditures that's spent on classroom activities, the average of these districts is 51.4%. Jefferson County is 49.2%, which is a pretty close proximity to the average, but it's still slightly below the average, also raising some questions. A third issue was a policy issue where we looked at the impact of seniority transfer, which is in the teacher's contract, as it relates to teacher experience across schools of varying levels of poverty. And what we find is that as the amount of poverty increases, the teaching level of experience decreases over time, which means that the high poverty schools have the least experienced teachers, and the low poverty schools have the most experienced teachers. There's an inverse relationship. And again, that raises some issues for discussion. Our recommendation is that this contract language be modified in order to gain equity across schools with teacher experience. Poor children from high poverty backgrounds need experienced teachers just as much as any other student. And so instead of having the rookies working with the high poverty schools, we need to have a good balance in teacher experience if possible, something to consider. The perception we heard, and we need to reflect that our data came from the organization itself, from within. There was a very strong perception that recruitment and selection of administrators is biased toward internal promotions. And what we found was that over 99% of the new hires in administration were from within the school system, and that was for the last 2 years. And then almost 100%, 99.9%, were advertised only locally or within the state. And this, of course, eliminates the possibility of finding better qualified, higher and more qualified individuals for those positions who may or may not be within this particular venue. So the recommendation is that those administrative positions need to be advertised nationally, and hopefully at least 1/3 would be hired from outside. The problem with continuing to hire from inside is that you do reproduce your strengths, but you also reproduce your weaknesses. And that is a consideration that we feel needs to be reevaluated. The hiring process was also perceived to be discriminatory toward friends or relatives in the Jefferson County School District. 61% of the people that responded to us indicated that the administrative selection process and hiring process was not, quote, very effective, unquote. And I need to make a note, a caveat. No incidents of board involvement in hiring was documented. This is not a board problem. This was at the administrative level. So the recommendation is that the superintendent draft a policy for board adoption that prohibits favoritism and nepotism in hiring, and that complaints about HR practices be processed by an independent and objective school executive, not in human resources, and that all recommendations to the board for hiring must provide documentation that there has been fair and equitable hiring. The full report has greater detail in regard to that. There's also a perception that we were asked to look at about principals who had been removed from persistently low achieving schools or PLA schools, and there was a perception that they were simply moved to other positions without loss of salary. The assumption and the perception is partially incorrect, but it's partially correct. What we found was that these were the salaries of the individuals as PLA principals, and they were moved into, in some cases, lesser positions, but maintained the same salary. And there's a practice called redlining, which means that you sit on your salary only getting half the raises that the other administrators might get until your position catches up with your salary. But the discrepancy or the difference between the two salaries is rather large in some cases. And so what we have is we have unequal pay for equal work within the system. And we also have a protective provision that even though you are unsuccessful in a school, a PLA school, you're still guaranteed a job with no loss of salary in some cases, regardless of that particular experience. So there's some difficult things to confront in that regard. And so our recommendation there is that positions in the system need to be open, and anyone qualified may apply for that position, and selection needs to come from applicants on the basis of qualifications, not on the demonstration of previous employment or failure in another position or something like that. So the system can be assured of having the most qualified person, you know, for a new position. The question we also asked is, how about information technology and management information service? Is it adequate for you to do the job as an administrator? 52% agreed, but 39% disagreed, which created a little dissonance in regard. So we have a recommendation of restructuring the IT department, the information technology department, and moved under the new position of Chief Operations Officer with some change in positions and assignments in order to maximize effectiveness in that division. We were told by some of the community leaders that Louisville plans to be a cutting-edge system in information technology, a high-tech community. It's the coming wave. And the school system is a very essential part of that particular ambition. And the school system then needs to have the appropriate technological capabilities in order to be able to meet that challenge. We then looked at curriculum assessment and instruction. We found it hampered by a number of factors. We looked at the size of the superintendent's cabinet. There are a number of positions, 7 or so, that have been recommended for removal from the superintendent's cabinet. And some positions different positions may be established in different areas, but no internal hires would be hired who do not meet the requirements for curriculum content expertise. Some of the content areas are very essential to student achievement, and they need to have people in those positions that are highly qualified and prepared in that particular specialty. And so we have a specific recommendation there. We looked at the Gaines Academy, read dozens of resumes, looked at qualifications for given positions, and we found that the curriculum content area qualifications and recency, in some cases were minimal. And the past hiring practice have perpetuated the Academy's weaknesses. So our recommendation is that the Academy be restructured and that new positions be established specifically in curriculum content areas, and that new positions would require the master's degree or even higher in the curriculum content area. So that was recommendation C2. The next recommendation involves early childhood education and exceptional child education, which is both the young preschool children and the special education children. And they face a number of implementation needs and housing issues. And our recommendation is that these areas be repositioned under the Chief Academic Officer in the Academic Support Division and have a standalone capability there because they serve the entire school district. The psychologists, and there are a large number of those that are the diagnosticians for these programs, need to be decentralized, and our recommendation is that they be decentralized into the 6 proposed school region areas, and that would bring them closer to their clientele, more accessible to parents, and so forth. So we also had some perceptions of the Human Resource Division. They called the effectiveness of this functional area into question with respect to hiring and job placements. So the recommendation is that that division be relocated under the supervision of the new Chief Operations Officer, who will oversee and work to improve functioning in the HR area. And there were some positions there that were recommended for elimination. Perceptions and complaints about facilities and transportations involved a number of things, including untimely service responses, concerns about cost effectiveness, and so forth. And we have some recommendations in the report to restructure the facilities and transportation departments, separate them, and then eliminate some current positions with restructuring of positions to better meet the needs of those 2 particular areas. Food services and nutrition were misplaced, in our judgment, in the financial services division. So we've recommended that this division be removed from financial services to the operations division under the supervision of the Chief Operations Officer. The Jefferson County Public Schools operate the largest restaurant operation in the state of Kentucky, and maybe in neighboring states as well. And it's a very complicated undertaking involving food service management, menu planning, nutritional requirements, federal laws, and so forth and so on. And so we're recommending it be removed from financial services and then placed in the operations area, where it would continue to serve all schools. However, the financial oversight and accounting functions of the division, as well as other divisions in the system, be retained within financial services. It's actually an enterprise operation. It is not a taxpayer-supported operation. It operates like a business, a profit and loss. So it has different requirements, but those accounting requirements would be met in the financial services division, but the operational part of it would be in operations. Information technology was found to be dispersed across the system with a variety of internal areas, and which created a problem with cohesiveness of service. And so our recommendation is that the decentralized IT components be centralized within that department in the operations division and supervised again by the Chief Operations Officer. Now, financial services functions were found to be adequate. I need to point out that adequate is the highest expression of praise that auditors can provide. We wanted to say something more encouraging, like exemplary, excellent, but actually they are adequate, and we had no problems with that organizational structure. However, there are the unit practices involving finance outside the financial division that do create problems for the school system. So the recommendation is that the Chief Financial Officer would develop and recommend to the superintendent procedures that would allow greater control and close scrutiny of all uses of public monies in all the units of the school system. The assessment processes and planning functions were also found to be dispersed and fragmented. So the recommendation there was to consolidate those processes and functions and put them under the newly created Division of Data Management and Program Evaluation Services. This also includes the student assignment planning and development of the program. The communications and community relations functions were characterized by some ambiguity and perceptions of ambiguity, and dispersion, which was not conducive to the effectiveness of communications or community relations. So the recommendation was that these be consolidated under the role of the Chief Community Relations Officer. And then that student assignment services, the implementation of those services, which involve the parent counseling and transfer issues and so forth, would be also located within the Community Relations Division under the supervision of the Chief Community Relations Officer. Health and Safety Department and services, currently partially in the Student Assignment Department, were found to be fragmented and too fragmented to dispense services effectively. So we're recommending that those services be consolidated and that they be relocated to the Academic Support Department under the Chief Academic Officer position. The last finding we had dealt with administrative compensation issues. We found disparities, inequalities, and automatic increases that were indexed to teacher salaries. Some of the issues included unequal pay for equal work. We have examples of that in the report. Widespread employment of or reemployment of retired personnel. Potential of conflict of interest in teacher negotiations. If the administrative salaries are tied to the teacher salaries, there is a potential for a conflict of interest. And then we also found that the salary structure was not aligned with the marketplace. And so we're recommending that the superintendent commission an external study of administrative compensation structures by a qualified financial accounting firm to study those issues and positions and duties and responsibilities, and then recommend policies and procedures that would correct the lack of alignment. So in summary, the study was commissioned by the board. We were asked to examine and review the structure of the organization, central office staffing, functions and operations, and provide recommendations for improvement. Most of what I would say all of what we have found was a reflection of what the people in the organization told us. We had input from over 300 people, and our findings and recommendations were drawn from that database. So it's basically a reflection of what the Jefferson County Public Schools said were the issues and problems that needed to be dealt with. Details of the report are found in the report, and it's a recommendation. The recommendations are to the superintendent as Chief Executive Officer for her consideration, and then determinations of plans and recommendations to the board for decisions that are appropriate to the board, which are solely in their discretion. So that concludes the overview. Dr. English will now field some questions.